welcome to this talk. We are so happy to have you here. My name is Susan Schoenberger. I'm the Director of Communications here, and I'm kind of pinch hitting today for Katie O'Leary, who many of you know is our Executive and Professional Education Director. She's out sick, so I am taking her place, and really just wanted to especially welcome our ambassadors who are here today. This is part of our Back to School series, which is a way of helping you get to know a little more about HIU and what we're doing here. And so we're really glad that you're here and part of that. And we're glad that everyone is here and eager to learn from our scholar here, Dr. David Grafton, who's going to be talking to us about this amazing scroll, which was donated to us through the efforts of one of our dear ambassadors, Hal Buckingham, who very sadly passed away before we could do this event. So we want to especially thank him and everyone who was associated with having this scroll donated to us. So thank you. And yes, Joel is going to also say a few words. Sorry, I didn't know that part.
I just want to greet you all as president. Hello, my name is Joel Lohr. Good morning to you. Peace be with you. Peace. Peace. It's really great to have you here. I don't know if you had a chance to see the video that David Grafton made. How many of you have seen this? You won't forget it if you have. If you haven't, you should go watch it because he has his Indiana Jones hat on and talks about the Ark of the Covenant. So I'm really excited about this today. And when I watch the video, you know, often I get asked, can you do an introduction? And when I saw the video, I'm like, I want to be there. This sounds fun. I do want to acknowledge Hal Buckingham today, our dear ambassador, dear friend, who had a vision for this coming to HIU, was a lover of Hartford Seminary for so many years, was such a big supporter of the name change and who we became as Hartford International University. Hal was a dear, dear man for those who know him. I came to love him. He's a dear person. I'm just grateful for him. He also remembered us in other ways in his estate, and so we're just so grateful for what he's done for us. Please remember us when you enter the kingdom. We're happy to use your funds to support students here to come and to learn and be peace builders. If you don't know much about HIU, please learn more about us. I'm assuming many of you do. I see trustees here. Thank you, Dr. Shakibai, for being here, and our ambassadors as well. So thank you. I will pass over to David Grafton. I didn't want this event to go by without greeting you and saying thank you for being here and to recognize Hal Buckingham. Thanks. Let's welcome David.
Good morning, everyone. It's a delight to be here. This has really been an interesting and serendipitous journey that I am really thankful for. It's been a good gift. And it all started almost a year ago when Hal sent Katie O'Leary an email saying, I have this scroll from Ethiopia, and I'm wondering if Hartford would be interested in having it or looking at it. And Katie had no idea what to do, so she forwarded it to me, and I said, oh, I have a background in Middle Eastern Christianity, and knowing the importance of this particular scroll to the story of biblical and Quranic and Ethiopic story, I thought, absolutely. So I was able to meet Hal and look at the scroll and said, you know, this would be great here for us. And so I'm thankful, we're all thankful that he was willing to donate it. And he and I had several opportunities to gather together to go to Hartford Framing and look at how to frame it and put it together. And so it was just a delight to be able to meet him and get to know him. And it's bittersweet that we are able to do this today after his passing this summer. But we do, as everyone said, we do want to recognize him. Before I get started, I just want to say a little bit about this building that you're in. If you haven't been in the building, this is the Marty and Aviva Budd building, Interfaith building. It houses the offices of the staff and faculty for our chaplaincy program, our peace building program, and the faculty of the Duncan Black McDonald Center. And so you can see some of the items of the Duncan Black McDonald Center, the gifts that we've received over the years. This is the oldest center in the United States for the study of Islam and Christian-Muslim relations. Started in 1973. So So it's older than any other university study center for the study of Islam. So we're delighted that you're able to be in this space. After the presentation and some time together, if you want to walk around and take a look, we have a musalla or prayer space, and in the men's and women's bathrooms we have ablution fountains for people, for Muslims who are ready to pray, so you can take a look at that. We invite you to do that. What I'd like to do today is several things, and I hope you'll have fun with this. And I must say, be prepared for audience participation, because it's required. All right? So what I would like to do is introduce you to this particular piece of art and what it means for the history of Ethiopia. I would like to introduce you to the story of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon, or Suleiman, in the Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Ethiopic traditions. Then talk about how this particular painting represents an important story in the history and identity of Ethiopia and its meaning for Ethiopians today. And then if we have time, we'll have some questions and answers. Okay. So let me just say a little bit about the painting and where it came from. This painting is from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And it was acquired, so here's the story. This is the story of the provenance of how we got this, or how we received it. It was acquired by Dr. Susan Randolph, who is now a retired economics professor from UConn. And she was on vacation in Addis Ababa in 1972. And she found this scroll or piece of art, as she says, from a street vendor in a market. And she purchased it. And she had it in her possession for 50 years, never really knowing what to do with it. So in 2022, she handed it over to a friend, Ellen, who then contacted Hal, who then reached out to Katie, who then reached out to me. Here we are, serendipitous. Now, the piece of art that you have before you is a painting on vellum, or animal skin. It's not particularly old, so it's not from antiquity. It was painted in the 1970s, but that becomes important, as I'll explain later on. And it shows the painting of what we call the Kebra Nagast from Ethiopia, or the story of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. Now, this particular painting itself, when you come up to look at it after the presentation, you'll notice that some of the painting is starting to flake off, which means that after 50 years, the paint wasn't necessarily all that expensive paint. And you'll see pencil lines where the owner of the shop drew the lines so that one of his staff could paint in the lines and reproduce a number of these paintings. And it reminds me a lot of the papyrus industry in Egypt, where you can buy all kinds of papyrus paintings. Maybe some of you have been to Egypt and you have those. So it's not particularly old or valuable in that regard. But what's interesting is that I've only found 2 other paintings of the Kebra Nagast that are being shown in the United States. One is at the Yale Museum, the Yale University Art Gallery, and the second is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So as far as I know, we're the third of 3. So that's pretty good. Yale, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Hartford. So that is a little bit about the painting itself. And again, I invite you to come up and take a look at that afterwards. Wallace Budge, who was an Orientalist, was the first British Orientalist, was the first person to translate the Kebra Nagast story from Ethiopic into English. Now, Ethiopic is a Semitic language similar to Hebrew and Arabic. And for those of you who know Arabic, you can probably figure out what the title means, Kebra Nagast. Kebra, which is Semitic for great or big, similar to Kabir, and Nagast, similar to ruler, or from the story in the Sirah of the Prophet Muhammad, Najasi, for the king of Ethiopia. So it simply means, as he has translated it, the glory of the kings. The glory of the kings, in this case, of Ethiopia. And this is what he says in his introduction of the translation that this story is about. The Kebra Nagast, or the glory of the kings, was to glorify Ethiopia by narrating the history of the coming of the tabernacle of the law of God of Israel, that is, the Ark of the Covenant, of her own free will from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. And to make it quite clear that the king of Ethiopia was descended from Solomon, the son of David, and through him from Abraham and the early patriarchs. But Christ also was descended from Solomon and the early patriarchs, and he was the Son of God. So, this story, the Kebra Nagast, was intended to make the people of Ethiopia believe that their country was especially chosen by God to be the new home of the spiritual and heavenly Zion. The point of the story here, in a nutshell, is that the Kebra Nagast, or the glory of the kings, is an Ethiopian narrative to create a historical memory for Ethiopians, to provide a national and religious identity through the Ark of the Covenant, which apparently is in Ethiopia and was not discovered by Indiana Jones. More of that later. Before we dig into the medieval tradition here, I want to place the story of Sheba and Solomon in a more contemporary setting. Film, music, art, to demonstrate how the Queen of Sheba and her life still resonates with many people today. For Americans, some of you may remember this film, classic film. Actually, we all can remember because it's on Turner Classic Movies. Solomon and Sheba, as portrayed by Gina Lollobrigida and Yul Brynner. But it was also, and I know none of us can remember this, she was featured in 1921 in the silent Fox film, The Queen of Sheba, which was quite scandalous for its time. But more recently, in 1995, the Queen of Sheba was portrayed by Halle Berry in Solomon and Sheba. Now, the Queen of Sheba has been mentioned and referenced in, as I can tell, at least 7 pop, rock, and hip-hop songs since the 1970s. She's been also painted and reportrayed by various artists and authors, and the subject of several children's books for Jewish and Muslim children. And the Queen of Sheba, interestingly, has also become, as of late, important for womanist scholars, that is, African American women scholars, including a colleague of mine, Will Gaffney at Bright Divinity School, who see the Queen of Sheba as a heroine, as a strong African woman. So she's become quite popular in scholarship today, in womenist scholarship. And in European art, her life has been represented in sculptures and paintings, poetry and music, and probably the most famous reference is from George Handel's The Arrival of the Queen of Sheba from 1749. So she's been with us for a long, long time. And of course, she is still depicted in both Ethiopic Orthodox, Egyptian Orthodox, and Persian Muslim art, religious art. So the story of Sheba, the Queen of Sheba and Solomon, and their, as we will see later, their steamy relationship, that her strength as a woman have captured the imaginations of many and still is with us today. But what do we actually know about the Queen of Sheba historically? Not much. The earliest reference that we have to Sheba comes from the Hebrew Bible in the book of 1 Kings, which most scholars think was written in the 6th century BCE. Vincent, could you read the first 5 verses of 1 Kings 10?
When the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, fame due to the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba had observed all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his valets, and his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her.
Thank you. Next, verses 6 through 13.
She said to the king, "The report I hear in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I hear. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices, and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Hiram's ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great cargoes of alm wood and precious stones. The king used the alm wood to make supporters for the temple of the Lord and for the royal palace, and to make harps and lyres for the musicians. So much alm wood has never been imported or seen since that day. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her return to her own country.
So this is the earliest reference we have of the Queen of Sheba, 1 Kings 10. What are some of the things you noticed about how it described her? How was she described? Yes?
It doesn't. It's all in relation to Solomon.
It's all in relation to Solomon.
Her.
Doesn't say how tall she was. What else?
She's a material woman.
She's a material woman. I like that. Wealthy. Right? What also is associated with her? Yes.
Well, I mean, she had some intellectual capacity because she came there with a bunch of puzzles and questions and riddles.
Yeah, she came
wanted
with
to solve.
excellent. She was quite astute. She had questions, and she knew that Solomon was wise, so she had all kinds of questions for him. And riddles. We'll come back to the riddles. What else? What else is associated with her?
She came with some kind of desire that Solomon was able to fulfill. We don't know what that desire is, and I'm interested to hear more from you.
Yes. So what is this desire? The desire takes different forms in the different traditions. We'll come back to that. That's good. I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah. What else?
She must have been the head of somewhat powerful kingdom if she had all those treasures to give.
Yeah. I mean, you would assume this is not just your average woman on the street with this, that she has wealth and power and from a kingdom, right? But does it tell us anything about that? No, it doesn't give us a whole lot of information about that.
There's one other thing.
Yeah.
Why were there two countries not at war with each other? Why were there two countries at peace with each other? And if they were at peace with each other, why was she taking the first move to give him gifts? Was she a vassal of his? Or
Was she a vassal? We'll come back to that because that comes up in the traditions. Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we know where Sheba is? Where is that country?
It doesn't tell us, does it?
Exactly.
Doesn't tell us. Now,
Do you know where it is?
hang on. Hang on. We still have some time left. Hold on.
That's a Dionne Warwick song.
All right, we do hear of Sheba in other places in the Hebrew Bible. Places like Job and Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. In Isaiah 60, we read this: Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. A multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. For Christians, this passage might ring a bell. It's often read at Advent, before Christmas time, with references to gold and frankincense. But here we have those from Sheba and the kings from around the world. In Psalm 72, which is attributed to the coronation of the king, we read this: May the kings of Tarshish and the isles render the king tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. May all the kings bow down before him. All the nations give him service. Long may the king live. We've heard that recently, haven't we? May gold of Sheba be given to him. May prayer be made for him continually, and blessings invoked for him all the day long. This passage from Psalms was often read, we think, during the coronation of the king in Israel, in Jerusalem, including Solomon. What stands out here in relation to Sheba? What is associated with Sheba here?
She was different because she's a queen. This all references kings.
This all references kings, the kings of Sheba.
But is she a ruling queen or a queen consort? It doesn't really tell us.
Doesn't tell us. The other thing that I think is interesting, what is associated with Sheba?
Well,
Wealth, gold,
Beauty.
beauty,
Camels.
camels. Thank you. Camels. Camels come up over and over and over again, which I think is really interesting.
One other thing is, she was nothing special. It gets lumped in with Midian Ephah and Tarshish. I mean, it's just, Sheba. It's
That's
not
right.
special.
All these other kings and kingdoms that are going to come to Jerusalem and give obeisance to the king there. Yeah, so nothing special. So we don't have any references to the Queen of Sheba outside of 1 Kings and a reference to or a rephrasing of that in 2 Chronicles. We do have an interesting reference to the Queen of Sheba in the New Testament, but there she's called the Queen of the South. The Queen of the South in Luke 11. I'll come back to that because it's a very interesting passage. So let's talk about the Queen of Sheba in the Quran and in the Islamic tradition. She's mentioned in Surah An-Naml, or the ants. And it's a very interesting and engaging ayat or passage about King Suleiman and his relationship with the Queen of Sheba. So here you have one of the children's books that references the prophet Suleiman, and you'll notice that he's not. His face is whitened out because prophets in the Islamic tradition are often not depicted. In this engaging passage, Suleiman gathers all of his courtiers and entourage together. And he notices that one creature is missing. That is the hoopoe, or the hudhud. Now it's important to know that in the Quran and Islamic tradition, the prophet Suleiman is given the gift to speak to animals. And so, when he gathers his entourage together, he finds out that the hoopoe is not there. Finally, the hoopoe arrives, and he says to Suleiman, "I come to you from Sheba with firm news. I found a woman ruling over the people who has been given a share of everything. She has a magnificent throne, but I found that she and her people worship the sun instead of God." Suleiman then sends an invitation to the queen to invite her to worship the one true God, so that she might convert or revert from her idolatry. She does not. In response, rather, she sends wealth or tribute. Suleiman then conspires to find a way to get her to come to see him in Jerusalem. And so he sends a jinn, or as we know in Western tradition, a genie. And the genie goes, or the jinn goes, and gets her throne that the hoopoe mentioned, and brings the throne to Jerusalem. The Queen of Sheba finds out somehow, we don't know, the Quran is not clear on this, that she finds out that Suleiman has it in Jerusalem. And so she travels to Jerusalem. There, Suleiman invites her into the throne room. And this is a very interesting passage from the Quran. The throne room has a long, it's very long, and there is along the ground, it looks like glass or crystal. The Queen of Sheba, when she gets there, she looks at it and she thinks it is water. She thinks it is a pool. And so as she steps forward, she lifts the hem of her skirt up so that she can not get her skirt wet, and then reveals her ankles and her calves, and then steps and realizes it's glass or crystal. And she recognizes how magnificent and how wealthy Suleiman is. And then she realizes that she's in the presence of greatness. And so she ultimately converts and devotes herself to the worship of the one true God. It's a very interesting passage. And we'll come back to this in the Islamic tradition in a minute. But like the biblical text, the Quran itself does not give her a name, does not call her a name. And in the Quran itself, like the Hebrew Bible, Sheba and Suleiman do not have any relations. It is purely platonic, or platonic, I guess I would say. What's that?
And material.
And material, yes, and material. The sexualized versions of the tradition come out later in both the Islamic and Jewish and certainly the Ethiopic traditions. Now, in these later medieval Jewish and Muslim traditions, we find both Islamic scholars and the rabbis elaborating on the stories that we have heard so far. They begin filling in some of the information that we haven't had to this point. And they are very similar, these Jewish and Muslim medieval stories. First, in the Islamic tradition, the authors fill in a number of things, including her name. She is now known as Bilqis. Bilqis. She is given a name. And secondly, she's not the queen of Sheba, but the queen of the Himyarites in South Yemen or South Arabia. So here we have, you were asking about where this might be. Here is South Arabia or Yemen and the Himyarites. Here is Ethiopia. And we can see that because of the short distance between the Red Sea, the kingdoms were actually quite fluid. And so whether Sheba was all of this or whether Himyar was all of this, we don't know. We just don't know. But in any case, in the Islamic traditions, she's given the name the Queen of the Himyarites. Third, in the Islamic traditions, Bilqis and Suleiman do have relations and they have a son. And his son is then named Solomon or Suleiman. And lastly, and most importantly, there is, in the Islamic traditions, or the stories of the prophet, a focus on her legs. Her legs. Her hairy legs. Because apparently, when she lifted her skirt, he noticed she had hair on her legs. In fact, in one tradition, Suleiman constructed this whole throne room so that he could see her legs, because there was a rumor that she was the daughter of the king of Sheba and a jinn. And therefore, she may have had the legs of an animal. And so he wanted to see that. But one of the authors of the stories of the prophet, Ibn Kathir, says the reason she had hairy legs is because she wasn't married. And therefore, there was no reason for her to shave her legs. Regardless, the rabbis also bring up the same issue. The rabbis in the medieval period are very clear that women are not to have hairy legs. They should shave them. And secondly, the rabbis of the medieval period say that women should not be queens. They should not rule, to get back to your point, Michelle. Right? So, here we have this tradition, the Islamic and Jewish medieval traditions kind of conflating together about who this woman was. But the rabbis also focus on, quite interestingly, the riddles. The riddles that she gave to Suleiman. So I thought that we would go through some of these riddles that the rabbis have. There are about 50 of them. We won't go through all 50. But I thought we would see how wise you are, whether you can answer the Queen of Sheba's riddles. Now, Suleiman had no problem with it. He went through all 50 very quickly. We'll see how you stack up against Suleiman. Now, to warn you, most of these are biblical. So we'll see how many of you went to, Hebrew school, Quran school, Bible class. All right? The first one, though, I'll break you in. This one is not a biblical reference. One of the riddles that the queen, says the rabbis, spoke to Suleiman was, listen very carefully, what is this Alive, it does not move. When it is cut apart, it moves. Alive, it does not move. When it is cut apart, it moves. Liz, you know? No? Scratch your head. A wooden boat. A wooden boat. Alive, the tree, it does not move. When it is cut apart, it moves. Suleiman had no problem with that one. All right, these other ones are from the Bible. So these are biblical references. Who was neither born nor died? Who was neither born nor died? God. Excellent. The Lord of the universe. Second, he was born but did not die. He was born Elijah. Oh, this is pretty good. Very good. Elijah, who went up to heaven. Right? All right, you guys are pretty wise. Last one. This one's really hard. I'll give you a hint. It's from Exodus, the book of Exodus. What was unborn yet given life? What was unborn yet given life? That's a good one. The golden calf. The golden calf that the Israelites made and worshipped. So those are just 4 of the 50 that Suleiman apparently had no problem with. So that's the Hebrew Bible, the Quran, and the Islamic and rabbinical traditions about the Queen of Sheba and how they fill in her story. Let's get to the Keber Nagast, or the glory of the kings. What does the Ethiopian tradition say about this, about her? Well, like the Islamic and rabbinical traditions, the Ethiopian tradition builds on these stories, but adds its own particular Ethiopic flair. First, the Ethiopic story follows the biblical and Quranic traditions very closely, but names her and gives her a name, Makeda. Makeda. She is known in Ethiopian history as Makeda. Second, rather than Ahupu, who hears the queen's wealth, hears the queen, and with Solomon, it is not the Hupu that comes back to speak to her, but a merchant whose name is Tamarin. And you'll see Tamarin up here. It is Tamarin who goes to visit Solomon and sees the wealth of his kingdom and the temple, and therefore comes back to let his queen know about the opulence and the wisdom of Solomon. So interestingly, here you can see Tamarin, who's traveling behind what? Or in front of pyramids. So he's traveling north, up through the Nile, and then across to Jerusalem. Third, Tamarin convinces the queen to travel to Jerusalem, not to go see his wealth, or under the threat of submission to be a vassal kingdom, but rather she goes because of her own innate desire to seek wisdom. She says, "For I desire wisdom, and my heart seeks to find understanding. I am smitten with the love of wisdom, and I am constrained by the cords of understanding. For wisdom is far better than treasure of gold and silver, and wisdom is the best of everything that has been created on the earth." Here you see this woman who's very wise, who's seeking knowledge. There's nothing material about it. There's nothing sexual about it. It's all platonic for the pure interest of wisdom. It is during this time that Solomon is building his temple in Jerusalem. And so, according to the Kebra-Nagast, Solomon shows the Queen of Sheba why he is building the temple, to worship God. She sees the magnificent structure and begins to become convinced about belief in the one God. It is during this time that Solomon teaches the queen about God and the Ten Commandments. And like the Islamic narrative, she converts from her polytheistic ways to worship the one true God. But now we get to probably the more interesting and controversial part of the story. And that is, Solomon becomes infatuated with her and conspires to sleep with her. One evening, he invites her to dinner and serves her very salty and spicy food. At the dinner, he promises her that he would never ever take advantage of her if she would promise never to take anything from his kingdom without asking first. They both agree, and then she retires to bed. However, while getting ready for bed, Suleiman has a servant prepare a big bowl of water and place it at the entrance of her bedroom, where she can see the water. And during the evening, she wakes up with a dry mouth from the salty and spicy food and remembers the bowl of water. So she goes to drink from the water, from the bowl of water. Suleiman, who happens to be sleeping just outside the door, hears her and barges in, confronting her that she has broken her vow. And so naturally, they sleep together. Suleiman then falls in love with her and begins showering her with gifts. So here are the panels that show the episode that I just spoke about. Eventually, however, Makeda returns back home after their torrid love affair, and then the plot thickens. She is pregnant, and she gives birth to her child Menelik. Menelik grows up, and finally, when he becomes of age, asks who his father is. The queen tells him the truth of his origin. Maybe not the whole truth, but at least who his father is. Menelik wants to go visit his father, and so travels north to Jerusalem to meet the king. And when the people see Menelik standing next to Solomon, they see two spitting images of one another. And so the nobles declare, "Blessed be the mother who's brought forth this young man, and blessed be the day wherein you had union with your mother, with the mother with this man. For there has risen among us from the root of Jesse a shining man who will be king." So according to the Kebra-Nagast, and this tells the story of how Menelik travels to Jerusalem and meets his father Suleiman. And then in the presence of Suleiman, or Solomon, is taught the Ten Commandments and the laws of God. And then he tells his father, "I must go home. I must return to my mother." And so Solomon says, "If you are going back, I will send with you the brightest and the best of my people, so that you will rule in your land like me in my land with my people." And so the firstborn are going to go back with Menelik to Ethiopia. Now, interestingly, the son of the high priest declares to Menelik before they leave, "If we are going back to Ethiopia, let us be assured that God will be with us. So let us take the tabernacle of God, the mother of Zion, they call it, and take it back with us to Ethiopia. They're going to steal the Ark of the Covenant. The son of the high priest is visited that night by an angel of the Lord who gives God's blessing to this event of stealing the Ark of the Covenant and taking it back to Ethiopia. And here you see an Ethiopic icon depicting this story. The Ark of the Covenant and the retinue are miraculously then transported back to Ethiopia. And as they pass along the way from Jerusalem through Gaza into Egypt, down the Nile, and into Ethiopia, miraculously all the idols of the Egyptian gods and goddesses fall over and are broken in a miracle depicting that the holy God is now present in their midst. Now, when Solomon wakes up in the morning, he feels that something has gone wrong. And so he goes to the temple and finds out that the ark is missing and realizes that his son has stolen the ark. And so in a fit of rage, like very much in the biblical story of the Exodus and Pharaoh's army, Solomon and his army then head off after Menelik to retrieve the ark. But along the way, Solomon is visited by an angel who says to him, "Why are you sorrowful, Solomon? For this has happened by the will of God." Solomon is saddened and realizes that his son has been given the Ark of the Covenant and the Ten Commandments by God's will. Menelik returns with the ark to his mother in Ethiopia, and there is crowned king of Ethiopia, son of Solomon, son of David, from the root of Jesse. And there he rules as the king with God's blessing. But that's not the end of the story. For the Ethiopian church, the descendants of Solomon and Sheba, through the line of King David, also are the descendants of the line are also Joseph the carpenter and Mary and Jesus. Thus, the Kebra Nagast ties the throne of Ethiopia to the family of David and the branch of Jesse, as understood traditionally by Christians as Jesus. The Kebra Nagast provides an origin story for the Ethiopian nation and ultimately the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, that their land and their church is the ultimate recipient of the promises of God to be the chosen people as outlined in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. For they have the Ark of the Covenant, the Ten Commandments. According to tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is at the chapel of the Church of St. Mary in Aksum, Ethiopia. And according to what I could discover, the latest person to have actually witnessed or seen the Ark was a British soldier by the name of Edward Ullendorf, who in 1941 said he gained access to the chapel and saw the Ark. He says this, he gave an interview in 2001 before he passed away. He said this, "I've seen it. There was no problem getting access when I saw it in 1941. You need to be able to speak their language. Classical Gez. They have a wooden box, but it's empty. It's empty." Nevertheless, all Ethiopian Orthodox churches in Ethiopia have a replica of the Ark in their sanctuaries, representing the presence of God in their midst in Ethiopia. Thus, for the church, the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, the story of the Kebra Nagast provides an identity of the Ethiopian church and the Ethiopian nation that stretches thousands of years from the Queen of Sheba up through Jesus and to the present day. And yet, no one has seen the ark. Thank you.